It is July, but there is no break from politics here in the state of Michigan. Joining us now, we want to bring in Dave Boucher, our favorite Free Press reporter. Great to have you back with us. How are you?
I'm great, Ronnie. How are you?
I'm just sitting back watching the show because I do think politics in Michigan, it's a show. It really is a show. It used to be the Detroit City Council, but now it's just really the state level.
Yeah, never a dull moment on the beat, that's for sure.
That's exciting as a reporter, though, right?
Yeah, it really is. It really is. It's a fun challenge to keep up with everything and make sure that we understand the full context of what's going on.
So I will say, if we can kind of start with your thoughts on James Craig announcing his run for governorship. Well, the exploratory committee, it's the worst kept secret, I think, in the entire state of Michigan.
Yeah, as my colleague Paul Egan noted, he announced yesterday morning that Chief Craig is creating this, what he's called an exploratory committee. And then on Tucker Carlson last night, he said that he's running. So the exploratory committee was efficient. It was fast. They learned everything they needed to in the 12 hours or so, it sounds like. But no, like to your point, everybody expected him to run. He's joining the race. And in theory, you know, he has the highest public profile of any Republican who was expected to run for governor at this point. He's never run for public office, but you know, it's somebody who seemingly Republicans are welcoming to the race very quickly.
I will say, I don't know who is the PR company behind his ad or his video that he put out announcing his exploratory committee, but hello, you can't have someone driving and talking at the same time. You know, he was driving. I don't know if you guys saw the video, but he was driving as he was announcing why he wanted to take on this challenge. And it was like,
eyes on the road.
Come on, yeah. I mean, even though you're looking forward, you're kind of leaning over, and we know you're going to be distracted. As the chief of police, he should have known better.
He was driving an American-made car, though. I checked his GMC, so you gotta give him credit for that.
Chief Craig he is a car guy, though. He's very much a car guy. If I can ask, because you know, as someone who has covered politics now for quite some time on the state level, and you're looking at Governor Whitmer, and he's already, you know, the political fighting is kind of starting on his side. But what is it going to take for him to be able to balance what's really happening in the Republican Party? Because I feel like the Republican Party is fractured following the Trump administration.
Sure. And this is, to be fair and to be clear, you know, it's not uncommon after a presidential election where the party's candidate loses for the party to kind of do a self-evaluation. I'm not saying that that's what's happening here, but it's definitely common for there to be fissures in the party after a loss. Yeah, the evidence of that crack and that divide and that infighting couldn't be more obvious in Michigan and everywhere else. And Chief Craig has been asked multiple times his thoughts about the January 6th insurrection, whether or not he's a Trump supporter, whether or not, you know, he'll campaign on similar Trump platforms, and kind of dodge those questions in part because he hasn't officially announced as a candidate, and seemingly he wants to introduce himself to a broader swatch of the state. You know, he's very well known in Detroit, Metro Detroit, not as much so outside of that area. So you could see potentially as a strategy not wanting to, or at least wanting to just introduce himself, give his personal story first before he gets into some of that. But yeah, it's going to be a challenge for any candidate that's running as a Republican. We've already seen some candidates really lean into the Trump ethos and try to go for that part of the base, and others are trying to you know, kind of straddle that line a little bit. But it's a challenge for sure.
So any other big names when it comes to Republicans do you anticipate are going to be throwing their name in their hat? I believe there are several others that already have, but really no one knows who they are. Yeah,
so there's some people who are already in. There's someone who is kind of a Trump truther, I guess, for lack of better phrasing, and you know, I would argue, and I think this isn't a derogatory statement, pretty far to the right. There's Tudor Dixon, a radio host. There's others. There are business people, and then there's lots of rumors, right? There's nobody likes to report on these sort of rumors more than this season when people are waiting for more candidates to get in. So there's been rumors of like Ronna McDaniel, the head of the RNC, or Betsy DeVos, former education secretary, the DeVos family. There's really no indication, like public indication, that either of those individuals are going to run or enter the race. And most people who follow politics know, despite some of the pushback and the criticism that the governor has received for months from Republicans and lots of other people on many different grounds, be it Robert Gordon's departure or how the state has used public pandemic rules, she has $10 million and she's an incumbent with a national profile. And that's tough to run and pour everything you want to in a campaign to win a Republican primary and then go up against an incumbent with that much money. So no, James Craig right now is definitely the biggest name in the race, seemingly in the race for the Republicans.
Yeah, I think the Republicans really have to come together if they want to try to take over the position of governorship because of what you just said. Governor Gretchen Whitmer, she has a national platform right now because we do know that she has a close relationship with Biden. But is that going to help her going into this next year, do you believe?
It depends. Obviously, Republicans would say that it won't, right? But we did see Vice President Kamala Harris was in the state recently, and she met with the governor and helped a bit of campaigning with the governor. Obviously, Democrats think that's going to help. Obviously, Biden won Michigan relatively easily, 154,000 votes, give or take. And so Democrats certainly think that that'll help. But again, we'll see. There are lots of other issues that Republicans plan to run on with the governor, her trip to Florida, again, what they call hush money payments to Robert Gordon and to other high-ranking officials in the administration, the orders that were in place. So there's lots for Republicans in theory, they think, to run on, whether or not that brings over those people who are in the middle, or whether or not, so-called establishment Republicans can get together with Trump Republicans and really push together for one candidate remains to be seen.
Dave Boucher with us here on the MegaCast, Detroit Free Press reporter. And Dave, if I can ask you, because one thing it's like you mentioned, James Craig has not run for public office before, and we're already seeing some of the mudslinging in the article that came out that he ran for bankruptcy back in the 90s. And I will say, I was like, if that's the worst you can get, good luck. I mean, and I will say, there's more. Anyone who's lived in Detroit and been in Detroit as long as some of us have, we do know there's a lot of talk about some things with James Craig. He's very loved in the city of Detroit, but there are some other things that could be under the surface that may be boiling up. So as a reporter, when we know that there are typically people associated with one political party or the other that will do the digging and then come present it to a reporter, how do you handle that in that situation?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and that happens all the time. And I would say it's comparable to any other story you're working on, any other sourcing that you might have. Almost every day, reporters get emails and calls with tips about, following up on something. But to your point, in a political campaign, in this sort of scenario, those tips tend to come with documents or background or sourcing. But you vet that just like you vet anything else, and then you talk about it with your team or your editors and decide what the public interest is. To your point, my colleague Paul Egan wrote about the story with Chief Craig and his personal bankruptcies. That's something that we thought was of value to our readers. Whether or not that sways voters is entirely up to them. One could argue that the bar for quote unquote scandal, not necessarily saying that a personal bankruptcy is a scandal, but the bar for scandal just continues to change, right? Especially looking at former President Trump. I mean, there were all sorts of allegations, wide ranging from financial to personal to whatever you want. Not only allegations, just, what he was caught on tape, the Hollywood Access tape, Access Hollywood, lots of other allegations. And obviously that didn't derail his presidential hopes. So, but it is public information. It's information that's out there. And so, that's a process that every outlet goes through about what they decide is important and how they're going to report that.
I'm going to be interested to sit back and watch and see if Kwame Kilpatrick ends up helping campaign for James Craig, because at the end of the day, we do know that it was Trump that helped release him from prison. And Kwame is a Democrat, and he still has a huge following in the city of Detroit, and we know he returned to Detroit. Why you returned to Detroit, who knows? But that's going to be a fun show to sit back and watch.
Yeah, I think, it will be interesting to see. I think obviously Republicans are going to find anybody they can to help campaign in Michigan. It's a state that, obviously Republicans think that they can win back. Both at the federal level and at the statewide level. I think the big challenge for Chief Craig is again, just name recognition outside of Detroit. He's on Fox News and cable news frequently, but he isn't as well known seemingly in Grand Rapids, Traverse City, Midland, just anywhere else outside of the area, the same way that Governor Whitmer is. And again, Governor Whitmer wasn't either until she started campaigning, started running. So, and there's plenty of time to get that name recognition out there. So we'll see. I mean, he's, as someone who's never run before, he's still got to win this primary, and it seems like it's going to be a pretty contested primary with lots of names involved. So we'll see. It's a challenge for anybody to win a primary.
So if we can talk a little bit, I know that you wrote the story yesterday regarding the Michigan House repealing the emergency powers law with Governor Whitmer. I'm kind of like, isn't this a dead deal? I mean, didn't the Supreme Court kind of take over that, or were they concerned that it was going to be overturned in an appeal process?
Yes and yes to everything you said. So that's right. There's a law that was passed in 1945 that gave the governor emergency powers in a time of crisis, and essentially allowed the governor to decide what was a crisis. Came in response to riots in Detroit in the 40s. And so in this case, Governor Whitmer, used that law to issue some of the widespread health and safety regulations in the early times of the pandemic. The Supreme Court ruled in October of last year that law was an unconstitutional delegation of power from the legislature to the governor, but it was a 4-3 decision, and the composition of the Supreme Court has changed since then. So there were Democrats or others who thought that if this law came up again to the court, that they might rule that it was constitutional. Now, the governor and really the health department have been issuing essentially identical COVID regulations under public health law. And that law is very specific. It was written in response to epidemics, and it gives the health director, the director of the Department of Health and Human Services, wide power to issue regulations in the hopes of stemming a health crisis. So there are currently efforts afoot to mount a similar, what's called initiative petition drive, to get enough signatures to potentially curb that power of the health department director in a similar fashion. We'll see if that happens. I think there's going to be a bigger campaign against that this time around after organizers were successful in this petition initiative drive that helped repeal this law. But it's an interesting framework that has been used in the past, but seemingly could be used more to skirt a Whitmer veto and put in place some of this conservative policy that the Republican-controlled legislature approves of.
So with that, Dave, can I ask you, what is it like to be a political reporter in today's climate? Because it seems it doesn't matter what you write. People are going to argue you're a Democrat or you're a Republican and you're just out to get the other side. How do you personally try to navigate the crazy world that is now social media?
Yeah, so being called a Democrat or Republican is like almost laughable compared to the stuff that I get all the time. Like if I don't get called a Nazi, it's a good day. Like that's the sort of rhetoric that I'm receiving anyway, again, almost daily. It tends to be like a very vocal, very small minority. But again, we hear it all the time. And I talk about it with colleagues, both at the Free Press and at other newspapers. There's a fair amount of pushback that you're going to get. Unfortunately, it's something that seemingly is come with the territory of being a political reporter, especially when people in high-ranking elected positions attack the media. There's no secret that the former President Trump, called the press the enemy of the people and continues to vehemently attack members of the media, regardless of whether or not you agree with their reporting. The personal attacks are obviously over the top and unnecessary, and really don't change people's minds other than to think that reporters' minds, other than to think that the vitriol might not be worth what we're doing day in, day out. But again, it's something that unfortunately I have a lot of experience with, and would prefer if it stopped. I tend not to respond to those emails that call me a Nazi. I try to engage with readers as much as I can, even if they disagree, especially if they disagree. But it's unfortunate, and it's only getting worse.
Because you always appreciate having different viewpoints, and that's the beautiful thing about America, is that we can express those viewpoints. And I just remember some of the emails that I used to get, or the posts on social media. People are just mean, and I would say, just so you know, this is more of a reflection on you than it is on me. So
sure.
Thank you for sharing with the world exactly who you are.
Yeah, and I should know too. I'm a white man in politics, and the sort of hate that my colleagues of color and colleagues who are women get is so much worse. It's awful, and it's gendered, it's sexist and racist, and just, awful vitriol for people who are just doing their jobs. And, the arguments almost always engage in a personal attack and don't engage in the facts of the story. And so while I get that hate, again, my colleagues get much worse. And those are colleagues who aren't covering politics either. It's almost across the board.
Well, I know that you have to have a thick skin when you work in media, but at the end of the day, it's like you said, you have a job to do, and you do it as a service for the public. And so we thank you for continuing to do that service, because we know it's not always easy, especially as the landscape of the journalism world continues to evolve and change. The deadline pressure that you and your colleagues are under each and every day is just insane. I think if the public could just come along for one day and be like, could you handle this? I mean, I remember, going to the feds, and it's like, oh, like you'd have like a month to write a press release. That was like 3 paragraphs, maybe. You're like, wow, okay.
Yeah, it's a little different, but I love it, and I feel very thankful and privileged to be in the position that I'm in.
Well, thank you for what you do. And again, don't let the attacks get to you, because I always said if I wasn't ticking someone off, I wasn't doing my job. So you're doing a great job.
I appreciate that. Thank you.